All right, let's see here. Looks like we're getting connected. And we are live on Instagram and we are live on LinkedIn and YouTube. So, all right. Hey, everybody. Happy Friday. Welcome to our final FinCrime Friday chat of the year. We are excited to have you here. It's just me and Brian today. As many of you probably are, Aaron is knocking off for the holidays for some well-deserved R&R, but we are happy to take this one out for the end of the year and wrap up what's been a really great run of our FinCrime Friday chat. So we're going to do a little bit of a year-end review, just me and Brian today. So before we get started, definitely make sure today that if you are not yet an ACFCS member, that you head over to acfcs.org and become a member today. We say this every single time, but there is no better value, no better way to enhance your financial crime compliance career than by joining ACFCS, earning the CFCS certification if you have not done that, taking advantage of the networking opportunities, the training opportunities, the exclusive webinars, all of the great stuff that we have going on over there. It all starts at acfcs.org, where you can become a member. And also, while we go through our conversation today, we want to hear from you. So first of all, let us know in the comments where you're tuning in from. We'd love to see that. We'd love to see the global community of financial crime fighters coming together here. So go ahead and drop a comment and let us know where you're tuning in from and what you're looking forward to this holiday season. Already see Stephanie from Idaho. Love to see that. Welcome, Stephanie. Glad you're here. See Shauna, Crypto Officium. Don't know if that's where I can find that on the map, but glad to have you here. Shauna from Louisiana. Sarah, hey, we've got Bangalore, India. Love to see it. So, but we'll go ahead and jump right into it today. So, Brian, great to have you back. We've got a couple of news stories, so let me pull these up. So, first one today, first headline: Trump allies block sanctioned Venezuelan oil tankers. Definitely, this one's been in the news. This is a big one, but a private security fleet backed by Trump-aligned donors reportedly blocked Venezuelan oil tankers from unloading cargo in the Caribbean, raising legal and diplomatic concerns about citizen-led sanctions enforcement. The incident exposes the growing complexity of sanctions implementation and the blurred lines between private and government actions. So I think it was just last week we were talking about sanctions, compliance, and enforcement, Brian. So what's your take on this, on the boarding of the oil tankers?
Yeah, and great to be here. It's good to see everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for our final FinCrime Friday. It's been a lot of fun doing these in 2025, and I see some familiar faces. I think, Stephanie, I know you've joined a few of these. Shauna, you've definitely been on some, so it's great to have our repeat customers, and if this is your first time, obviously welcome as well. I think you said it in the line that you read out there, Clayton: increased complexity of sanctions compliance. And the reason why we're starting with this story, it's not so much the political angle of this as the sheer intricacy and complexity of sanctions compliance and sanctions enforcement that we've seen play out really since 2022. Sanctions has never been easy, straightforward. It's always had a heavy overlap with national security. But as we see greater use of sanctions in a wider array of arenas, as we see more national security usage for sanctions, I would say, than maybe we have in the past, things like export controls of sensitive goods, the attempt to restrict certain weapons or the production of certain weapons using sanctions. It's just gotten more and more knotty and difficult from a compliance perspective to implement. And now this angle of like civilian enforced sanctions compliance is a new one for me. So yeah, I mean, that'll be one of the big themes. I think not to get ahead of ourselves or spoil anything as we have this conversation, but going into 2026, sanctions compliance, the complexity of sanctions compliance, the overlap between not just sanctions compliance but financial crime compliance writ broad and national security, and the focus on the maritime sector for sanctions. These are going to be big issues in the new year. So that's why we're starting with that one. Keep it in mind, and have that on your radar as we wind this one up and look ahead to the new year.
All right. And our second one, this is another topic that we've talked about a lot in multiple broadcasts this year. So the Thailand Cambodia border crackdown is also targeting scam operations. So Thailand's military operations near the Cambodian border escalated in December, partly targeting scam compounds responsible for global cyber fraud, human trafficking, and crypto laundering. The crackdowns reflect Southeast Asia's growing role in transnational financial crime and the region's efforts to dismantle embedded criminal economies. So I feel like this one also, both of these two headlines kind of tie together, this kind of international military action and activity, geopolitics with the world of financial crime. And this one is really fascinating to me because we always talk about the Cambodian scam compounds. And it's just this layering of illegal activities all focused in these, crazy compounds. So Brian, what do you think about the Thai military stepping in and taking action around these compounds here?
Yeah, it's a fascinating story. You know, Thailand and Cambodia have had this long-running border dispute, and it flares up occasionally, and sometimes leads to military conflict, which is what's been happening in the past several months. And it's one of those cases where like a bad thing turns out to have a good result in some regard, because this border crackdown, this military conflict is negatively impacting scam compounds in the region. So look for a silver lining in a geopolitical conflict, but it does totally tie in, Clayton, to what you're saying on the interlinking of financial crime issues with national security issues and with nation states in general. That's another, it's not a new theme, but it is one that continued throughout 2025, is financial crime being connected to not just organized crime, not just like mafia style families or transnational groups, but nation states. And in Cambodia in particular, we'll talk about the Prince group a little bit later. But in Cambodia in particular, there are a lot of very connected political figures, essentially ruling families that have ties to organized crime running these scam compounds. That's not to cast a broad brush and cast aspersions on all of Cambodia's politicians or anything like that, but that is the reality. And we saw some sanctions designations this year of Cambodian politicians, senators, etc., as a result of these ties to scam compounds. So definitely another big theme is financial crime being driven by nation state actors or facilitated by nation state actors, to a degree and to a pervasiveness that maybe we haven't necessarily seen so much in the past.
All right. Well, fascinating stuff. And yeah, we are going to talk more about the specific groups, some of which who have been targeted or arrested, and some of their political, geopolitical connections. So that I think really helps set the stage. So let's jump right into our year-end review conversation. So from sanctions disruption in the Caribbean to transnational scam networks in Southeast Asia, the headlines that we just talked about are really emblematic of the kind of issues and the turbulent year that we've seen in financial crime and compliance. In 2025, geopolitical tensions, decentralized technology, new law enforcement strategies all collided and are reshaping how crime is committed, tracked, and stopped. So let's hop into our questions about the year as a whole. What changed, what surprised us, what the shifts mean for you guys who are tuning in today as you head into 2026 professionally. So, Brian, right out of the gates, what was the most important financial crime trend or shift that you observed in 2025? And, what stood out? What's the biggest thing? Top line.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's a hard question to encapsulate in a single year. But again, keying to some of the stories that we just touched on, the themes that we'll get into. Um, there's a really interesting report. It's put out annually. It's called the Global Organized Crime Index. And if you want to look it up, it's a Global Organized Crime Index 2025, and they track, uh, you know, illicit economies, and the actors behind them are always like a best guess, right? Because they're underground, they're illegal for a reason. So, how much money they're making, how large they are, etc. It's always a reasoned estimate. But this report attempts to get to the best of their abilities at who's behind global organized crime and what the primary activities are. Um, and this year's report found, and again, not necessarily a new trend, but a trend that, if you look at the trend line, continues to go up. Found that the criminal marketplace by organized crime groups, and these include state embedded groups, they call them, groups that are in some way facilitated by or directly led by a nation, um, mafia style groups, criminal networks, foreign actors, criminals acting outside of the jurisdiction where they're committing the crimes. Um, the the profit making activities that these groups were engaged in, a lot of the traditional ones like drug trafficking, um, counterfeit goods, extortion, arms trafficking, were actually flat or down from 2023 to 2025. Um, Two of them that were significantly up were human trafficking, which was slightly up in terms of the prevalence and the amount of funds they were raising off it. The biggest one was financial crime. So when we look at, I would say the biggest, issue of 2025 is who are our adversaries in the financial crime space. Um, and increasingly, it's not the enterprising amateurs. They're still out there. They're very prevalent. In some way, they're a bigger issue than they are in the past because the bar for entry in terms of things like fraud, we saw this very heavily in the pandemic. There was like a super low barrier of entry for things like check fraud or certain government relief fraud. So you had a ton of enthusiastic amateurs raiding those spaces, but you also had sophisticated organized crime groups, including some with ties to like nation states. And that trend has just continued. So when we think about who we're up against and we think about where sophisticated transnational organized crime, including nation states, are making their money, it's less on the trafficking side and increasingly more on the pure financial crime side, the fraud, the money laundering, etc. So that really puts you kind of in a bind, right? When it comes to the sophistication of your controls, when it comes to thinking about where your risks are and how you're assessing for those risks, when it comes to thinking about what channels are vulnerable to you, it's not, I don't want to scare people out there, but it is something that I think institutions really at all levels, and I don't think that you at a community bank or small fintech or et cetera are not vulnerable to this. I think these sophisticated operations use those institutions as well. Um, it's something that I think you need to think about. So I'll stop the kind of soapboxing there. But that would be, again, it's not really a single trend. It is a collection of trends. But that would be the biggest kind of takeaway from 2025. Um, Sophisticated crime operations, whether they are, the mafia groups of old or the state embedded actors of today, are making money off financial crime. They're seeing that as a profit center, a profit driver. And that means we're up against some very serious, well resourced adversaries.
All right. Well, I think that speaks to the need to continually be training, learning, and staying on top of what those trends and typologies are. Of course, we know where you can do that, and we have excellent resources that will keep you one step ahead, or at least abreast of where the bad actors are headed. So,
Yeah.
okay.
Well, before we
Number
get to our next question, I want to throw that question back to the audience too, because I want to hear your top theme trend of 2025. Do you agree, disagree? Do you have something else that you would replace that with? So yeah, throw it in the chat. I would love to hear from you. You know, what have you seen as the most prevalent trend of 2025? What would you highlight as the top risk area you're seeing or area of concern?
Yeah, absolutely. Would love to hear your insights and your experiences out there. So please, questions, comments, thoughts, drop them in the chat there, and we will be happy to respond. So Rebecca there says it's only going to get worse, unfortunately, and yeah, it's easy to be pessimistic, but we're gonna stay in the fight with
We'll try
this,
to bring some holiday cheer before we wrap up here. I think there are actually, you know, as depressing as I've been so far, I think there's been some really bright spots this year that we'll, you know, talk about looking ahead to 2026.
All right. Rebecca also mentions money mules there. That, of course,
Yeah, it's a great segue, I think, to our next topic of conversation, actually.
all right. So here we go. All right. So next question is, how did the rise of synthetic IDs and generative AI impact fraud and onboarding processes this year? And what detection strategies are proving most effective?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it ties into the money mule issue. I think money mules have continued to be, from you know what we hear from our members and organizations that we work with, they've continued to be a huge challenge for financial institutions. You know, a lot of them are money mule networks that have been built and operate within the institution, and you might discover a couple of accounts and then start to pull the threads and realize that it's actually much wider than you know you previously thought it was. um, and in a lot of cases it's real, right? These are real people who are being used for muling purposes, and the oldies but goodies are still an issue. Students, you know, international students in particular, who come to a country, open accounts, and might even leave the country and then sell their accounts for use as mule accounts, maybe even unwittingly. It's just somebody that says, oh, I buy old accounts. um, you know, these KYC buy sell sites, I think we've talked about it in the past, but if you want to laugh and you have a Facebook account, go on Facebook and search KYC buy sell and see how many results you get. And then if you want to further laugh, put your institution's name in there. And if you're an institution of any size, you might have a dedicated subgroup that just exists to sell KYC information for your institution. And traditionally, at least, I don't know if it's changed, but traditionally, at least, you know, Meta, when asked about these groups, would say that they don't violate their terms of service. So you got that going on, the traditional stuff. But more recently, we've seen a massive spike in generative AI driven synthetic ID fraud, which contributes to the problem of muling, right? Because it's so much easier now than it used to be to scale up attacks. Now, not all of them are going to be successful. You know, it's the old whack a mole game. Banks and other financial institutions have gotten better about detecting synthetic identities, but you don't need to always be successful when you can do things like upload an Excel spreadsheet with 300 synthetic identities that you created by buying some tax ID numbers off the dark web and combining them with other fake bits of information. You can take that file, you can put it in one of the many services that will create very convincing looking ID documentation that are advertised all over both the surface web and the dark web and all the various fraud channels on places like Telegram and Discord. And you can then try out these different IDs, right? Maybe it's California driver's licenses, and then it's US passport cards, not the passport booklet, but you can get a passport card issued instead. You know, maybe it's UK passports, whatever the case may be. Just create a bunch and see which one works, and then hit the institution with whichever one works. So if you get one ID to pass, that means you might be able to get more to pass. And this is cheap and easy to do. And we see the numbers from one study I saw this year really bear this out, where synthetic ID document fraud was really increasing. Deep fakes and facial recognition were way up over last year. So AI driven synthetic ID fraud, and it's beyond, we're focusing on the onboarding piece and the individual piece, but it's way beyond individuals. Creating a synthetic business is easier than ever, right? You could always do it; it just took more work. You can do it in minutes now to create a synthetic business using AI-driven, tools to create a website and then create a bunch of supporting documentation that goes along with it. There was a really interesting case of a impersonation fraud scam using a company. It was a real company. It was called Thackeray Mines and Minerals, and they created a fake website to go along with it, with a fake board of directors, names, photos, bios, LinkedIn profiles, and then all this AI driven annual reports, incorporation documents, everything, which if you've ever used any of these tools, ChatGPT or whatever, you know that they can create very convincing looking documents very quickly. So this has been a huge challenge. I think we don't have a good answer for it yet at a lot of organizations and institutions. I think really what I hear, and again, I'm not an expert in the space, so I rely on talking to experts, but what I hear a lot from folks is layers of controls, including adaptive verification. If you see certain risk indicators, in the onboarding process, then you need to move them to different types of onboarding, different channels beyond, image of the onboarding documents or even the liveness check that can be deep faked really easily. Um, you know, the old CIP elements that we've used forever and ever, a tax ID number, a name, an address, so on and so forth. These are not really good indicators of identity anymore. Maybe they were never that great indicators of identity. I don't know. But these days, these are really bad in a lot of ways. I mean, it's not bad. Like you got to collect them, right? It's still important to have that. So I don't mean bad in the sense of like, oh, we need to be doing entirely new things. But in terms of being able to rely on them from a risk assessment, financial crime perspective, they've just gotten less and less reliable. So what other data can you pull in to do this type of onboarding and verification? You probably have it. You're probably using some of it already, but moving away from these models of identity is going to be, a shift that I think has to continue and even move a lot faster going into the new year as we live in this AI driven fraud world. I
Wow.
would be interested again from the audience whether you're seeing an increase in generative AI or whether you even have the ability to know this would also be interesting. If you're seeing any increase in generative AI related fraud, like new account fraud that's connected to Gen AI, or fake identities that you think are generated using AI, that type of thing. I know some institutions may not even really have the ability to say that with 100% confidence, but if you do or have seen it, I'd love to hear from you in the audience.
Yeah, and a comment there from Rebecca saying we no longer accept passport cards as a valid form of ID.
There you
And
go.
it's, yeah, more things change, the more they stay the same, I guess. All right. So, yeah, let us know in the comments if you are seeing that type of material coming through, or if you're finding fraudulent or generative AI generated ID materials come through. We would love to hear what you're seeing. Helps us know what we can expect. All right. So another thing that we've talked about on the FinCrime chats, and that was has been a major issue this year, is stablecoins. So in 2025, we saw major growth in the use of stablecoins for illicit finance. We talked about that on one of our chats just 1 or 2 months ago. What compliance challenges does the growth of stablecoin usage create, and what could help improve that situation?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, stablecoins are obvious preface, which I think I say every time. Stablecoins are, primarily a illicit channel for financial transactions, and they combine the benefits of crypto, which are the speed, the possibility, at least, I know a lot of folks don't use them this way, but the possibility of conducting like non-intermediated peer-to-peer transactions, and the borderless, particularly the borderless, very easy to conduct cross-border transactions via stablecoins. They combine all that with the stability of most, anyway, traditional currency, fiat currency, you can call it, right? So they definitely have a strong case to be made as a really powerful financial instrument, but like any other attractive financial instrument, we've seen heavy adoption by financial criminals, and particularly in the sanctions evasion space, there's definitely been an increase. I would say it probably started at least a couple of years ago. Um, but I remember, in 2022, there was a lot of talk about, oh, crypto and sanctions evasion, and like, oh, it's kind of happening here and there. Maybe it was already happening back then, and we just didn't know enough about it. But it's definitely happening now. The use, and particularly Tether, seems to be attractive for certain sanctions evaders, and they're not just using it to like move and conceal funds; they're using it for transactions. They're using it to buy stuff. And particularly, it's come up in a few cases this year of Russian actors using stable coins, primarily Tether, to purchase goods, sensitive electronics, avionics equipment, etc., for Russian military connected parties to fuel Russia's war machine. So, these are sanctioned goods, they have limitations, they have exports controls. And so, it's a procurement operation that's being run in stable coins. Um, it's also been pretty prevalent in the scam space too. We've seen, historically, I think Bitcoin was the most popular. And over the last couple of years, there has been a shift to some of the stable coins, which are sometimes then laundered back into other forms of cryptocurrencies. Or the stable coins are used as a step along the way in the laundering chain, right? They might go from the victim to the scammer's wallet in Bitcoin, but then it'll be consolidated and swapped for a stable coin before being transferred on in the laundering cycle. So really two areas of like large increase on the stablecoin side, and that would be as a payment mechanism for sanctions evasion schemes, and as a tool in the laundering flow for scam operations.
Okay.
Um,
And what about ways to try to address either one of those two?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to some of the kind of basic stuff that we've talked about. Obviously, if you're at a crypto exchange, you have a lot of the heavy lifting to do in this space. Um, and you probably have been looking at this issue very closely, right? If you're not at a crypto exchange, it goes back to understanding your risk exposure, right? And and knowing your customer's customer. What is your customer doing? Who are they transacting with? Is your customer transacting with a crypto exchange, or moving money to through a crypto ATM or that type of thing? And do you have the ability to actually identify those transactions? Have you done that work? A lot of institutions have. Some institutions out there are still in the I would say more basic, not to be too harsh, mindset of, we don't bank cryptocurrencies still, or we don't work directly with crypto firms, and so our risk exposure isn't there. Um, but if stable coins, if other crypto is now part of these more mainstream laundering channels, if it's moving from fiat into stable coins or vice versa, you have a part in the sanctions evasion or laundering scheme, even if you're a fiat based financial institution, right? So you need to understand how you are connected to it, even if you're not directly banking or serving the crypto industry. I think that risk exposure is still there, and it's only going to grow.
All right. Okay. So moving on, we talked a little bit already about um, drug related stuff. So, that brings us to how are cartels and transnational criminal organizations, or TCOs, evolving their tactics, especially in areas like fentanyl, human smuggling, and gambling based laundering.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I mean, obviously, there has been a lot of pressure this past year on Mexican based drug cartels, some South American, but a lot of it has been focused on the Mexican cartels from the US. Um, this is not exclusively a US based issue, but a lot of the fentanyl trafficking does go into the US. It's the center of the kind of opioid crisis, although it's bled out into some other jurisdictions. Um, and there's been a heavy use, going back to one of our big themes of sanctions in this space to combat the transnational organized crime groups. It's been interesting to see the shift of um, supply chain. We used to have a pretty clear cut supply chain of, sometimes finished fentanyl, but definitely precursor chemicals from China into Mexico, where it's produced and then sold and then moved over the border to be sold. More recently, there's some indicators, and you see some in this, slide talking about these different labs and groups that were sanctioned. Some indicators that more of even the production of like precursors is taking place in Mexico, um, versus being purchased overseas. So that's interesting from a transaction monitoring perspective. You might not see as much of those cross-border trade transactions as you might have seen in the past. um, there's also been some indicators that um, there's actually more attempts, whether it's successful or not clear, more attempted smuggling of fentanyl and other drugs over the border to compensate for a loss in human smuggling proceeds from a lot of these cartels. The border security has been a big emphasis. More military National Guard deployments onto the border have made human smuggling more difficult, less of it taking place. Therefore, they got to make up the money somewhere. So it's like the old balloon effect that they talk about in the drug enforcement world, where you squeeze the balloon in one place and it pops up in the other. So definitely an evolving landscape in some regards. In some areas, still, kind of business as usual. We also saw some really good FinCEN alerts and notices related to Mexican cartels over this past year. So if you're looking for more nitty gritty on red flags, tactics, typologies, etc., I would check that out. There was one on oil smuggling over the southwest border that also points to kind of, I mean, again, not a brand new tactic, but a newish tactic and a sort of diversification in cartel activities beyond the traditional drug trafficking. Um, I would say, keep an eye on the kind of oldies but goodies, particularly when it comes to combating fentanyl trafficking. You're going to want to look out for equipment purchases still. You're going to want to look out for high risk industry sectors. Um, you know, like we saw in those sanctions designations, all of them I think had lab in the name. So medical supply industry, chemical and industrial import export firms. Sometimes it's concealed under nutritional supplement manufacturing companies. And make sure like the CAS, the chemical abstract services numbers too, and are monitoring for that type of thing, because any transaction that might have that, or a trade deal if you're in the trade finance space, that's going to be really relevant for spotting any type of precursor that might be related to fentanyl trafficking.
Wow. Fascinating stuff. Gotta stay vigilant on those. I did want to call out one comment that Laura shared that said, responding to Shauna's comment about AI voice recognition using DNA to verify identity, but Laura pointing out that AI voice has been an issue in scams in Latin American countries this year, where fraud using AI tools to imitate a person's voice became an issue. And
Yeah.
wow, that's scary stuff. Would love to hear,
Yeah.
Laura, if you want to share some more about that in the comments as well.
Yeah, please. I mean, I would love the Latin American perspective. It's definitely a trend that's played out in other jurisdictions too. The impersonation scam type of thing is nothing new. But we've seen a lot of family member impersonation scams that use the voices of family members.
Wow.
And they're able to do this because the AI tools have gotten really good. You need like 10 seconds, right,
Right.
of audio to create a convincing voice. Where can you get that? Anywhere on social media, right? So it's not hard at all to find the audio you need for a convincing impersonation scam. And then, in addition to family, a lot of the other ones that have we've seen quite a bit this year have been probably no surprise. Tax authorities, impersonating tax authorities remains very popular. Toll road scams, huge one. By one estimate I saw, it's a $2 billion industry. It's primarily operated out of China. Chinese scam groups running these toll road scams, saying you have an unpaid toll. Lawyers have been a popular one in a lot of
Yeah.
jurisdictions, impersonating lawyers. And then impersonating local law enforcement has been another. So you see, like, I'm from the IRS in the US, or I'm from other tax authorities in other jurisdictions, but particularly in Canada, talking with some of the folks there, impersonating like local law enforcement and even providing like a name, in some cases like a badge number or police number, to make it really convincing of a real officer. Um, and partly why they're able to do that is because AI makes it really easy to research and summarize, names of local police departments, even find the website or find the names of officers, for these impersonation scams, and write scripts, the whole 9 yards. So yeah, definitely impersonation scams that are very much tailored. LLM assisted social engineering has been a big theme of 2025.
Hard to get more dystopian than that. So,
Well, we're
all
gonna
right. So,
find out if we can get more dystopian.
I guess we will. That's right. That's what 2026 is for. So, all right. So we mentioned the Prince Group earlier. Let's talk about them a little bit. The pig butchering scam empire, essentially, that was run by the Prince Group, highlights the scale and sophistication of romance fraud, pig butchering fraud type scams today. So, what can institutions do to improve monitoring and victim protection there?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if this counts as holiday cheer, but I said I'd try to bring a little holiday cheer. And seeing the Prince Group, be dismantled or at least put on the back foot is great. This is one of the many operators of large scale scam compounds. The picture there is Jinbei Casino. Jinbei was the corporate name that ran both gaming institutions and a whole host of scam compounds under the name Jinbei. This guy, Chen Zi, and his operatives in the Prince Group also ran Golden Fortune Science and Technology Park, which is another one of these sprawling scam compounds. And they were connected to, political figures and allegedly potentially Chinese organized crime, although this guy Chen Zi's background is pretty murky, to be honest with you. Um, Long story short, he has now been indicted, and the Prince Group is subject to sanctions. They seized 15 billion worth of Bitcoin that is allegedly tied to the Prince Group and the scam operation. That in and of itself is an interesting story, which I think we talked about on one of the last ones, as to the exact provenance of that. In the interest of time, we won't get into it. But, you know, in terms of good news, it's encouraging to see the full weight of law enforcement tools be brought against scamming. We've talked quite a bit on these FinCom Fridays about the pig butchering, the scam epidemic taking place, um, and how it is rising to the level in a lot of countries to be like basically a national security issue. So it's good to see this kind of full force law enforcement, and sanctions approach be brought against a scam compound operator. So I think this was one of the success stories of 2025 is this shift in the perception of scamming as something that's like a fraud problem to like a societal problem that needs a more, I'm not going to say we've got there yet, but a more whole of government approach to solve it. In terms of monitoring and what to do about it on the FI side, there's no silver bullet, but customer awareness remains really important. I think driving customer awareness and driving customer education is still really good, even if it is hit or miss in how effective it is. Um, and I think some of what we've seen this past year has been more tailored approaches to customer education that have seen better success, more in the flow of transaction education. Like, hey, you're doing a transaction that other customers have noted is a scam. Are you sure you want to proceed? Or quick pop-ups that just say like, hey, there's a new thing that is happening to people like you, be aware of it, versus the kind of blanket emails that are like, watch out for fraud, so
Right.
those types of things less effective, but the more tailored, the more customer centric, the more in the flow of transaction education has seen some encouraging results. So that's been another bright spot of 2025. I think institutions should seek to take that forward in the new year. Another risk area that this story highlights is the prevalence of gaming, particularly online
Mm.
gambling sites, in the laundering flow. They used a lot of gaming sites, particularly crypto gaming sites, to launder scam victims. They did a lot of different stuff. It wasn't a simple, like, transfer here and launder and then cash out to fiat. There's multiple steps, but in a lot of the transactions, the Prince Group's operatives were using crypto gambling sites as part of the laundering operations. Um, so your exposure to the online gambling space, and particularly the crypto gambling space, is a risk area, and your customers' exposure to that space is a risk area that I think you should be aware of going into the new year.
I know at one point in one of our previous FinCrime chats, someone in the comments talked about their education program at their institution. And you laid out a couple of ways of kind of broaching those subjects about, hey, this is potentially risky behavior, or not behavior, but a risky transaction, or we're seeing other customers that, you know, have been scammed using similar type things. I'd love to hear from you and from anybody who's viewing in the comments, tips or strategies for starting those maybe sometimes awkward, conversations without, coming across as maybe being patronizing, to your clients.
Yeah. Yeah. I think in that case, we were talking about, like it's natural to respond negatively if you feel like you're being attacked or accused or like whatever, right? So if you're able to broach the conversation in a roundabout way, like, oh, I know somebody who once fell victim to a scam, or oh, another customer had this happen to them. Have you ever heard of anything like that? Has anyone been a victim of a scam? Do you know anybody? And the chances are, yes, they know somebody, right? The customer knows
Unfortunately.
somebody, and even if it's not going to get them to stop the transaction at that time, it might plant the seeds of doubt that'll, help them to stop future transactions, right? But if you come at them like, this is probably fraudulent, this is likely a scam, that sounds like an attack or an accusation in a lot of cases that is going to get people to turn off or react negatively. And also, they're being coached a lot of times that, oh, they're going to tell you it's a scam because of XYZ reasons. So they've already been given an excuse to opt out of that. Coming at it from a different angle, an angle that they don't expect, of like, hey, somebody else had this happen to them. Hey, a friend of mine, a customer like you, etc. That can often open the door in a way that the direct angle will not necessarily allow you to do.
Right. I think that's helpful. If anybody else has experience or recommendations about starting those conversations, let us know in the comments. We love seeing that. Okay, so we're getting close to time, so we'll jump ahead here. I think probably people could guess what you're going to say for this one, but looking at 2026, what are your top three focus areas for financial crime professionals to be paying attention to, staying on top of? in 2026, and what's going to be the sneaky thing that catches people that people aren't aware of in 2026? What's the boogeyman?
Yeah. The prediction business is notoriously difficult, right? So, I like always when I do the year in review webinars, we sometimes start with like a review of last year's predictions to see what we got right and wrong and keep us honest. We tend not to do super well, but some of them we get right. So can you trust me? Maybe. Um, I think one of them we already touched on is obvious, which is sanctions compliance, the connections to um, a wider range of national security risks, and the overlap between sanctions and the trade space, particularly in the maritime sector. These are all going to be really important. Um, Another area, again, probably not a surprise, is going to be generative AI fraud risk, something that really will, I think, continue. Again, these are, sophisticated, commercially available tools that continue to get better and increase in the accessibility and the functionality. Um, I think, if you've played around with Google's AI tools, the image quality and the realistic aspect of the images is better than ever. So they don't have that kind of AI sheen anymore that kind of gave it away. They look more real, more kind of gritty and lived in, right? So that's just one example of how difficult it's going to be. The other, like math, it's gotten much better at doing math. So if you want to generate a fake invoice or fake receipt, it'll actually get the math right. Spelling mistakes, all the old tells are going away, right? So generative AI risk is going to be a huge one. The other thing that I think kind of dovetails with that is automated financial crime. AI allows you to automate conversations with scam victims, for example. You can have AI chatbots initiating and conducting conversations with dozens of scam victims or hundreds of scam victims at one time. You can automate attacks, um, account opening attacks in an effort to open new accounts. So there's just this range of automation that's more accessible and easier than ever. You can even vibe code some of it, if you want to use AI for the coding aspect. So those are my three kind of, I guess, more obvious ones: sanctions risk and the complexity of sanctions, generative AI fraud, and automated financial crime. And then the third one that might be, or fourth one, I guess, that might be less on the radar, but I think is my wild card issue for 2026 is AI agents in financial crime.
Mhm.
We've seen AI agents already being used to shop for people to say, hey, here's deals on whatever, pants, this type of thing. The next step is going to be allowing those agents to buy those things, right? Click
Right.
yes, purchase this item. So you're going to be having AI agents probably in this coming year. For all I know, they're already doing this already, conducting transactions on people's behalf, and they will be authorized transactions. That's also going to open the door for financial criminals and fraudsters to attempt to pretend to be AI bots or create AI agents who hijack transactions, or a whole host of issues. It also creates all sorts of problems with your identity verification. How do you know an AI agent is authorized to conduct a transaction, isn't going rogue, isn't being controlled by somebody else, so on and so forth. And there's already groups like, Google, Apple, et cetera, are already working on this. They're working on payments, protocols for AI agents. So there's solutions in the works, but I'm not sure that it's full. We're fully ready for that world at all yet. So definitely something to keep an eye on.
Wow. Somebody said, what, five-fingered people in AI now? Yep. The AIs have mastered hands or gotten
Yep.
pretty close to mastering them at this point.
They've
So
mastered hands and they're able to make a half full glass of wine,
he-
which would they were never able to do before.
oh man. Well, it has been a really wild year in FinCrime this year in 2025. I have no doubt that 2026 is going to be equally as exciting, probably sounds like we're going to have some pain points. Um, any last pieces of advice for anybody here watching or encouragement for 2026?
I would say stay optimistic, because while all of this technology and AI tools create maybe an intimidating landscape for us, there's also some really exciting things we can do, not just with detection and prevention, but with disruption. And we've seen this already take place with like having a fake AI chatbot talk to a scammer. If it's a known scam number, you can reroute it to an AI chatbot and have it waste their time and make their life miserable. Uh, so, and that's just the tip of the iceberg, right? If we have resources and tools that allow us to go on the offensive and commit disruption against financial criminals, I think that's the next frontier. Instead of just playing defense all the time and trying to catch them as they come to our institution, utilizing some of these really cool things and utilizing our own very human creative minds to think about how we can go out there and make the cost of business higher for financial criminals and make their lives worse is exciting. And I hope we can harness that as an industry and take that forward in the new year, because I think the opportunity is out there. I think more and more institutions are going to look for opportunities for disruption, either on their own or in collaboration with law enforcement. And I think that's where we should go. So I would say, looking ahead, stay optimistic, stay hungry to learn more, stay creative, because we need you out there in the fight. What you're doing really matters. And ACFCS is always here to support it. We love what we do because we love equipping our folks out there with more knowledge, more skills, more tools to bring the fight to the financial criminals.
That's right. 2026 is the year that we take it back to them. So, okay. So this has been a great conversation. It's been a great year of doing these FinCrime Friday chats. We're going to be back next month in 2026 on January 30th with our next FinCrime Friday chat. That's going to be a conversation about human trafficking. So heavy conversation, but it's going to be a really great wrap up and talking about the human trafficking webinar series that is actually going to launch on January 6th. So if you want to learn more about human trafficking, if you want to learn more about ways to identify and disrupt and potentially even save lives, join us on January 6th. That is a free webinar. Anyone is open to join. The remaining webinars that will happen each Tuesday in January are going to be for members only. So become a member today. That way you're able to access all of those incredible webinars. That is really a great series, and it's going to be running all through the month of January. Like I said, then we'll have a conversation where we share some of the highlights and learnings from that on January 30th for this FinCrime Friday chat. We also don't forget about our DAX, our digital assets compliance specialization, a new course to give you skills to take you into 2026 to stay ahead of the bad actors in the stablecoin, crypto, digital assets space. Brian, what am I leaving out for 2026 or upcoming events?
I think you nailed it. We have a lot in store in 2026, but we won't throw it all at you here. We have some great events coming up. AHT series is always awesome. This year, there's actually 2 webinars every Tuesday for on human trafficking. After that, we have our FinCrime Skills Summit that we're gearing up for in March, looking at the top skills to equip you for a powerful 2026. That's going to be another great virtual event. We're launching a whole bunch of new online coursework to keep you updated, make sure you're informed and knowledgeable. So we have a lot in store for the new year. We're excited to bring it to you. And as always, a huge thanks to all of our members and our CFCS certified folks in particular who tuned in. Really appreciate you and really appreciate you being here.
Thanks everybody for the conversation. Thanks for everything that you do. This work matters. You could be saving people's actual lives, if not just their bank accounts. I hope everybody has a wonderful holiday season, however you celebrate. We'll be thinking about you guys, and stay vigilant. We will see you in 2026.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.